Stalingrad. It's a name that echoes through history, etched in fire, smoke, and an almost unbelievable level of human sacrifice. To truly understand its significance, we need to go back to the summer of 1942. The German war machine, the Wehrmacht, seemed invincible. They had swept across Europe, crushing armies and storming deep into the vast expanse of the Soviet Union. To many, their victory seemed not just likely, but inevitable. But then, Adolf Hitler, driven by a mixture of strategic ambition and personal obsession, made a fateful decision. He diverted his forces to capture a city on the Volga River, a city that bore the name of his arch-nemesis, Stalin. This decision wouldn't just lead to another battle. It would unleash hell on earth. The initial German assault on Stalingrad was overwhelming. Waves of bombers from the Luftwaffe turned the city into a sea of fire. Over 40,000 civilians died in the first week of bombing alone, and the city was reduced to a landscape of skeletal, smoking ruins. German commanders on the ground were confident. They reported back to Berlin that the city would fall within days, maybe a week at most. They had every reason to be optimistic. They had superior numbers, better equipment, and a string of victories behind them. But Stalingrad was different. This wasn't the open-field warfare they had mastered. This was something else entirely. This was what the Germans would come to call Rattenkrieg, rat war. The battle for Stalingrad was a descent into a new kind of urban warfare. The fighting was not for cities or districts, but for individual streets, for shattered apartment blocks, for single rooms, and for piles of rubble. A building could be held by the Germans on the first floor, the Soviets on the second, and Germans again in the attic. The front line was everywhere and nowhere. It could be the wall separating two rooms, a pile of bricks, or the floor beneath your feet. German soldiers, trained for rapid mobile warfare, found themselves trapped in a meat grinder. They had expected to conquer the city in days, but weeks turned into months, and they were still fighting for the same ruined factories and bombed-out houses. Every corner was a potential ambush. Every shadow could hide a sniper. The Soviet defenders, under the iron-fisted command of General Vasily Chukov, adapted to this brutal environment. They became masters of close-quarters combat. They would hug the German lines, staying so close that the German artillery and air support couldn't be used without hitting their own men. The life expectancy of a new soldier arriving at the front was often less than a day. The Soviets famously received one simple, terrifying order from Stalin himself: not one step back. For them, retreat was not an option. Behind them was the Volga River, and beyond that, nothing. They would defend the city to the last person, to the last bullet. This wasn't just a battle for a city. It was a battle for the very soul of their nation. Imagine being a German soldier in that cauldron. You've been told this is the final push, the last great battle before victory. But every day is the same nightmare. You advance a few feet, only to be pushed back by a desperate counterattack. The enemy is unseen, hiding in the labyrinth of ruins, emerging from sewers and basements. Snipers like the legendary Vasily Zaitsev became phantoms, picking off officers and soldiers one by one, spreading fear and paranoia. The psychological toll was immense. The constant stress, the lack of sleep, the sight of death all around it wore men down, turning confident conquerors into haunted survivors. Then, as the brutal autumn fighting bled into winter, a new enemy arrived. An enemy the Germans were completely unprepared for: the Russian winter. General Winter, as it's often called, descended upon the battlefield like a silent executioner. Temperatures plummeted to -30, -40 degrees Celsius. The German army, still dressed in their summer uniforms, began to freeze. Frostbite became as common as battle wounds. Engines seized up, weapons jammed, and the simple act of survival became a battle in itself. Food supplies dwindled. Ammunition ran low. The once mighty German Sixth Army was being slowly, methodically strangled by the cold and the ruins of the city they had failed to conquer. While the Germans were freezing and starving inside Stalingrad, the Soviet High Command was preparing a masterstroke. Under the direction of Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the Soviets had been secretly amassing huge armies on the flanks of the German position. They waited, patiently building up their strength, while the Germans exhausted themselves in the city. Then, on November 19, 1942, they launched Operation Uranus. In a massive pincer movement, two Soviet fronts smashed through the weaker Romanian and Italian forces guarding the German flanks. Within just 4 days, the trap snapped shut. The entire German Sixth Army, over 250,000 men, was completely encircled, trapped inside the frozen wasteland of Stalingrad. The German commander, General Friedrich Paulus, begged Hitler for permission to break out. But Hitler, from his headquarters hundreds of miles away, refused. He promised that the Luftwaffe would supply the trapped army from the air. It was a promise that was impossible to keep. The air bridge was a catastrophic failure. The Sixth Army needed hundreds of tons of supplies every day just to survive. They received only a fraction of that. The situation inside the Kessel, or cauldron, became a living nightmare. Soldiers resorted to eating their horses, then dogs, cats, and rats. Starvation and disease ran rampant. Men, weakened by hunger and cold, froze to death in their foxholes. The once proud and disciplined army began to disintegrate. The final weeks of the Battle of Stalingrad were a slow, agonizing death. The Soviets squeezed the pocket tighter and tighter, systematically destroying what was left of the Sixth Army. The fighting was desperate and one-sided. Starving, frostbitten German soldiers, many without ammunition, faced well-fed, well-equipped Red Army troops. On January 31, 1943, General Paulus, who had just been promoted to Field Marshal by Hitler in a veiled command to commit suicide rather than surrender, was captured in the basement of a ruined department store. A few days later, on February 2nd, the last remnants of the German forces laid down their arms. The scale of the devastation was almost beyond comprehension. When the guns finally fell silent, the city of Stalingrad was gone. It was a ghost town of rubble and corpses. In total, the battle resulted in an estimated 2 million casualties, making it one of the bloodiest battles in human history. Of the nearly 300,000 Axis soldiers trapped in the cauldron, only about 91,000 survived to surrender. And of those, only around 5,000 would ever see their homes again, the rest dying in Soviet captivity. But Stalingrad was more than just a battle. It was the psychological turning point of World War II. For the first time, the myth of German invincibility was shattered. The world saw that the Nazi war machine could be stopped, and it could be defeated. The victory, achieved at an unimaginable cost, gave a massive boost to Allied morale across the globe. For the Soviet Union, it was a symbol of their incredible resilience and will to resist. From the ashes of Stalingrad, the Red Army began its long, brutal march westward, a march that would end in Berlin 2 years later. History was forever changed in the ruins of a city that refused to die. Thank you for watching. If you found this look into one of history's most pivotal moments interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the past. Let me know in the comments what other historical events you'd like to see covered. See you next time.